And I am done. So I just finished up reading A Time of Blood by John Gwynne. This is the second in the Of Blood and Bone trilogy. And I wanted to give you my thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just now. So I absolutely love this book. This was a 5 out of 5, once again, for John Gwynne. This is now the 7th 5 out of 5 score that I've given to John Gwynne, and one 4.5 out of 5. John Gwynne is amazing. I just love this guy. If you have not checked him out yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. This book was very, very, very top quality and one of the best books that I've read all year. Although I've read a lot of good books this year. It's certainly not my favorite book. I don't even think it's my favorite John Gwynne book I've read this year, but it's really good nonetheless. So this is the second book in the series. The first book I gave a 4.5 stars, and I want to explain a little bit about why I gave the previous book a 4.5 and why I'm upgrading this one to a 5, because in a lot of ways, they're very similar books. And I think the biggest problem I had in that first book was it was very slow. I don't mind a slow book, a very slow burn. A lot of books that I love are a slow burn. The problem with the first book was it was a slow burn up until the last, 50 to 75 pages, which were really crazy, fun, action-packed, extremely good ending. And while the whole book was good, it took a very long time to get there. And I thought the first book would have benefited by being quite a bit longer and making, that first half of the book, that slow burn, and then the second half of the book really rise up the action. But this book fixed that problem. And what it did was, we already know the characters. There's no need for setup. This book ends right on the tails of that crazy conclusion of the first one, a couple days later. And you're right into the action. So this entire book is high-octane fantasy that I adore. John Gwynne writes some of the best high-fueled action sequences, crazy things happening, crazy twists, just like kind of that huge AAA movie kind of book writer. And he does it so well. But yeah, I thought this book was significantly better than the first one because it solved that basic problem. Now, the other problem I had with the first book was I felt like the world was too small. And what I mean by that is, when you open up this book and you see the map, and this map is the same as the Faithful and the Fallen map, because it's the same world. The Faithful and the Fallen was 4 books, and then there's like 150-ish year gap between the end of that last book of the Faithful and the Fallen and the first one of this. And it's peace in those years that you are not following it. But all of a sudden, evil rises again, and it must be put down. And in that first book, characters travel from all ends of that map, and it's that classic kind of, think of like a Song of Ice and Fire, where you have lots of different characters all over this world, and they come together, they split up, and just tons of seeing different parts of this world. Well, in this series, this trilogy, it's only taking part in like 1/10 of the map. Everything that happens in the book happens in that 1/10 of the map. So that epic scale of it is way toned back. And while I didn't really appreciate it in the first book, now that we've really understood these characters and the plot is really ramping up and we're feeling like it's got its own plot, it's not just, Faithful and the Fallen Part 2, this time we're serious. It's got its own thing going now. And in a lot of ways it is similar, but it is different. But you really get the sense now that we're not just ignoring the other parts of the world. This is where all the action is. This is where the meat of the world is all coming together. And it's where all the important events are going to go down. And so I can excuse the more narrowed focus. And while I do appreciate a much larger story, it's working well for this own book. And I think one of the reasons that John Gwynne did that was it's very difficult. And not a ton of authors have been able to pull off doing the time jump, where you do 2 different series with a big time jump in it. Joe Abercrombie is somebody that's really succeeded in this. He did the his First Law trilogy, and then he followed it up with the Age of Madness trilogy, which was, kind of like the next generation of that world with a new dilemma going on. And you have to, when you do this, you have to make it similar so that you bring back the fans and make them appreciate the things that made the first one so lovely. But you also need to make it different. Otherwise, it's just going to feel like a ripoff. And so that tighter scope, I think, is a big way that John Gwynne has differentiated himself, because you kind of have to tell a little bit of a similar story based on, I don't want to ruin anything in this book, because I truly think that you need to go into this book pretty blind, and you'll appreciate it a lot more. And that's true for almost all books, in my opinion. So you also got this sense in this book, because it's a tighter story, there's less named characters, you're not kind of forgetting what's going on after you have these big jumps between events. You have two main parts of the map that are happening here. And characters are kind of switching back and forth between where they are on this. But, in this book, one chapter will end over here, and then this area will pick up. So it just bounces back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You're never forgetting what happened, and you're coming to learn about these characters much more intimately than the first book. And even beyond the main POV characters, you really get a sense of these other characters in a lot more close of a fashion, which I really appreciate. So I feel like a broken record here when I say this, but I have to say it in case you haven't seen my other videos. But John Gwynne is becoming more famous, but in my mind, he's the best action sequence fantasy writer that's ever existed. His battle sequences are mind-blowing. They are literal perfection, all of them, because a lot of times in battle sequences you get this confusing writing where it's hard. I'm sure it's very difficult to write an engaging battle sequence because you have thousands of little parts going on, and you can't write thousands of pages about this event. You have to wrap it all up in 50 to 100 pages or so. And he's got this an immense ability to tell an epic battle, but you really get the sense that you're there. You understand everything that's gone on, and you can finish reading one of these and explain it to somebody else in vivid detail. And that's really special, because these aren't cookie-cutter battles. These are all terribly unique. If you brought up any of the battle sequences he's ever written and you named a book, I would still be able to tell you. Even years after reading these books, you'd be able to say exactly what happened. They're written that well. This one is incredibly high up that list for memorable battles, especially the last one. The last one is a special sequence that would be a fitting ending to pretty much any fantasy book, but this is that middle book. Middle books often in fantasy series have that lull in the action before that third book really comes to its master huge moment. Well, this book ended, and it really felt like it was as good or better than the ending sequence of most books. So you really get that sense that this last book is going to be special. And I cannot wait to read the third book in this trilogy. I'm going to read it, I think, in the month of June, probably a few weeks from now. This series, more than the previous one, really played with this idea of good versus evil with a more gray. You get a sense here, based on the first series, very clearly who the good guys are and the bad guys. The good guys are white, angel-like creatures. The bad guys are dark, devil-like creatures. And in the first series, while you may have a little bit of morally gray characters, mostly the humans that aren't sure what side they are supposed to be on, even here, between literally the angels and the demons, they're not called that, but think of them like that when I explain this, because if I use titles, you're not going to understand what I mean if you haven't read these books. Even between these people, you're not, as you read it further, you are questioning and you're being like, are these angels the good guys or the bad guys? And are these devils really the bad guys? Because they make some terribly convincing points. And it's fun. I mean, modern fantasy, this is a very common trope that they do, playing with constant morally gray characters. But this book does it in a very, very good way, because it's not trying to be morally gray. It's not doing that, A Song of Ice and Fire or Malazan, where everybody is some shade of gray. It's kind of playing with you a little bit. It's like, here is a black and white world. Now we're going to mess with you a little bit. And I appreciate that kind of twist on this formula that's so popular right now. So I mentioned before that John Gwynne, for me, is writing masterpiece after masterpiece. The worst book I've read of his was the last one that I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. That's special. I have never read an author that is this consistently amazing. And while he's not my favorite author, I think that title would have to go to Steven Erikson. His floor is so much higher than all the other authors. Brandon Sanderson, who I love, has written some stinkers. Robin Hobb has written some stinkers. Steven Erikson, I feel like, has written a couple stinkers. John Gwynne doesn't know what that means. He is incredible, and he's clearly my second or third favorite author of all time. And it's only going up over time. It just blows my mind that this guy could come out of the blue writing a series of 4 books in that Faithful and the Fallen, and for me being perfection, all 5s. His first 4 books this guy's ever written were 5 out of 5 stars. That's crazy. There's some authors that I love that are 5 out of 5s, but they've only written a couple books. I'm thinking of like Brian Lee Durfee, who I've reviewed last month, wrote 2 books that are both 5 out of 5s for me. I absolutely adore them. If he wrote 5 or 6 more books, would they all be 5 out of 5s? Maybe, but it's really hard to do. So hats off to John Gwynne. You rock, my man. And if you haven't picked up any of his books, I strongly encourage you to go drop everything you're doing right now. Just quit your book you're reading right now. Pick it up later. Go read The Faithful and the Fallen, or go read The Bloodsworn Saga. Totally different worlds. Doesn't matter which one you start with, but start with one of those, and you're in for a major journey of 9 currently published books. I think 9 books or 8 books. Not sure. I'm bad at math. But you're in for it. So go pick up his books. That's my review. I hope you enjoyed it.